You are listening to episode 19 of the EU Startups podcast. Today with Phil Libin, who founded companies like Evernote and all Turtels and raised a 100 million Series B round earlier this year. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of the EU Startups podcast. First of all, sorry for the longer pause, but we were quite busy with the organization of our upcoming Future Travel Summit, which will happen as an online event on November 24th. And we also just started with the organization of next year's in-person EU Startup Summit. Speaking of upcoming events, if you want to see the future unfold in front of your eyes, don't miss out the grand final of the EIT Health InnoStars Awards, where the most promising healthcare innovations of 2021 will be announced. EIT Health InnoStars Awards is a first-class talent competition in healthcare for startups from Central, Eastern and Southern Europe by EIT Health InnoStars. Even though they come from different regions, they have something in common. They all have the potential to revolutionize the healthcare industry and impact the future of medicine. The event will be broadcasted live at BioEurope's virtual event on October 27th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Don't miss the pitches and the announcement of the winners, which you can also follow on the Facebook page of EIT Health InnoStars. And now, without further ado, let's jump right into today's interview, which has been recorded by my colleague Charlotte.
Today we're happy to be joined for the next edition of the EU Startups podcast by Phil Libin, a serial founder and investor who no doubt has a wealth of tips, experience and knowledge to share with our listeners today. Phil is the co-founder and CEO of All Turtels, a mission-driven product studio, and was co-founder and CEO of Evernote, a tool to help people stay on top of their tasks and productivity. Previously, he was managing director at venture capital firm General Catalyst, and before that, Phil also co-founded Core Street and Engine 5. Now, in his current startup called mmhmm, which, in case you're wondering, is spelled mmhmm, was created during the pandemic, and he's focusing now on making video communication more clear, compelling, and just generally a bit more fun. So, hello, Phil, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Is there anything you wanted to add? Did I miss out anything important?
No, that all seems very, very comprehensive.
Okay, cool, awesome. So I'll jump right in with the questions. So, could you give us an inside look on your entrepreneurial journey? Have you always thought of yourself as a creative person, a creative personality, or is it something that's developed over time?
I mean, my entrepreneurial journey has kind of been I think it feels like a random walk over the past few decades, but I think it feels that way to a lot of people. Like, I certainly never had like a central plan for, what I wanted to do and kind of still don't. I always assumed growing up that I'd be, that I'd just have a job, that I'd be an engineer or something. And that didn't work out. I was having a hard time actually, holding down a respectable job, and starting companies wasn't really something that I ever was like specifically drawn to. It was just what I did because I had to, keep busy. It probably took a few decades to actually realize that is an okay path through life. It felt like failure for the first 30 years.
Yeah. So were you someone who, for example, did you have like little projects when you were at school? Like oftentimes you speak to entrepreneurs and they say, yeah, when I was 15, I started selling lemonade or anything like that.
Yeah. I had all sorts of companies and projects and, scams all through, since I was probably an early teen. I was working, I got into computers pretty early on. I moved with my family to the U.S. from what used to be the Soviet Union in the early 80s. So I grew up in a really rough neighborhood in the Bronx, and the gangs wouldn't have me. So I just pretty much just stayed in my room the whole time, and I begged my parents for a computer, and they got me an early computer, and so I kind of got into programming from the early 80s when I was a little kid. And there was always something to do. There was always somebody willing to pay money for some kind of computer stuff. And yeah, just kind of stuck with it and started my first real company with some college friends of mine, a couple of years after college.
Cool. So it was kind of, a way to keep busy at home, like staying away from the trouble on the streets with your computer.
Yeah, I mean, it was mostly because the trouble in the streets didn't want me to participate. I wasn't cool enough.
Cool. Okay. So talking about you founded a fair number of companies. So when I was researching for this podcast, I was looking at obviously what each company is focusing on, and I noticed that they often, they're focused on lots of different industries. So I wondered how you've said before that you always focus on what the market wants. So how have you managed the challenges of relaunching each time in a new sector, or does it just seem like it's a new sector from the outside, but actually from the inside, you've found some commonalities between each?
No, it feels pretty random. Our first company was Engine 5, and we didn't really know what we were going to do. I mean, the only thing we knew was there was going to be something that involved typing, code into a computer, because we were all engineers. That was our skill. And this was in '97, so it was right in the heart of the original, .com bubble, when you just run around saying .com a lot, and people work. And so there we just wound up, working and building what was happening at the time, which was the beginning of e-commerce. So we built a lot of the first e-commerce sites, things that let you buy things on the internet, which was kind of a new thing back then. We sold that company, and then we're trying to figure out what to do next. And we thought, well, we don't want to repeat what we just did, largely because we never had a product. We were just sort of working. We were building other companies' e-commerce systems and sites, and that seemed, you weren't really. We were getting paid really well, but we weren't building a product that would have residual value. People would pay us, but then when we stopped working, they stopped paying us because we were basically consultants. So we said, okay, we want to build a product. So we tried to figure out what that should be, and that was a month after September 11th. We were starting that second company, Course Street, on October 11th of 2001. And I think everyone just, a month after September 11th, everyone wanted to do something, a little bit meatier, a little bit more meaningful than, selling random stuff through a web browser. So we started Course Street. We had a brilliant co-founder from MIT, Dr. Silvio Picali, and we went into kind of high-end security and encryption and cryptography. Did that for a bunch of years, 6 or 7, and then sold that company. And we're sitting around with more or less the same team. Like, it's the same group of people, except it grew with each company. And we said actually the opposite of what you just said. We were like, we are so tired of thinking about what the market wants. It's like the previous two companies was all about what does the customer want? What do e-commerce retailers want? What do big banks and governments and people who buy high-end security stuff want? And the third time around, we were just like, we're done with this. We just want to think about what do we want? What if we build something for us, just something that we love? And that was kind of the inspiration for Evernote. Really to just build something where we didn't have to care about the market or the customers. And then it changed several times in the next few. And so I'm on company number 5 right now, which is kind of depressing to say. I've yet to demonstrate learning behavior, and I've started 5 companies, even though it's something that I always warn people against.
Okay, so that actually runs into my next question, because I was going to ask you about Evernote and all Turtles and your experience building those companies and the previous companies, and whether you had this is quite a difficult question, because I think in reality your journey is not quite so punctuated by learnings that you can just pull out in a nice succinct line, but from those previous companies, maybe 1 or 2 things that could be useful for founders who are listening that they could take on board.
Well, I think a bunch. I think one was Evernote, and for the first few years went really, really fast, and it was I think largely because we were doing this thing where we were building for ourselves, and building for yourself is sort of a cheat code. It's like if you're playing a video game and you find the cheat code and all of a sudden you're invincible. Kind of felt like that because if you just start with the premise that you need to have a really excellent product to succeed in the current world. And it just takes a lot of iterations to make something excellent. Like it takes 10,000 iterations to make something great. Then it really comes down to how fast can you iterate? How fast is each cycle? And when we were building things, for my second company, for Course Street, we were doing large government security stuff. each iteration took like a year and a half because, you have to you build something, you deploy it, you wait for a formal feedback process. There's like a review, you build something else, like 18 months go by between product cycles. And so you need to get through 10,000 of them before your product's going to be really excellent. And each one takes a year and a half. That's, 15,000 years until you get to a really excellent product. It's like too long, doesn't fit into my time scale. But at Evernote, we were making stuff for ourselves. And so we could iterate every 20 minutes, right? Like every 20 minutes we could make a change. And as long as we were being honest, we would be like, oh, is this better or worse? Is it better or worse? You can get through that same 10,000 iterations much faster within a couple of years. And that's a superpower. And so building for yourself, solving your own problems comes with all sorts of disadvantages, which is why we kind of stopped doing it after Evernote. Like for all Turtles, we really tried not to do that. Mostly because I think this is part of the Silicon Valley problem is we're all trying to solve our own problems, and our problems are very, very narrow slice of problems in the world. And there's many other people that are much more deserving to have their problems solved than, the tech company founders. So I'm glad that we've moved past that. But if I had to do it all over again, I would have made Evernote my first company, because I think if you're just getting started, you can learn so much and go so much faster if you're building for yourself, and you can figure out what this company thing is all about and go much faster and learn a lot more. And then, companies 2 through 5 or whatever, you can build something for other people.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I guess in that sense, you were your own target audience. So you're just testing yourself. Yeah.
Very, very much so. And we're sort of doing it again unintentionally for the current company, because it started as a joke. We didn't intend to build this as a real product or a company in the beginning. We were just trying to make ourselves laugh because everyone was so depressed and sad in the beginning of COVID. And so we started building this thing, and it went really fast. And I remembered after a few months, I'm like, oh yeah, right. It's kind of like early days of Evernote. We are once again building something where we are the target audience, and that has lots of problems, but man, it's really fun and it's really fast.
Yeah, and in that sense, actually, the challenge that you were trying to fix is something that people all over the world were facing, right? So yeah, it's more than just the tech founders in Silicon Valley. So it has a much bigger audience. So I actually had a question about that topic. What were the exact pain points that you were trying to fix? You mentioned that you were just trying to make things more fun and kind of make each other laugh. Did you have any other objectives once you started realizing that it could actually grow into a company that was sustainable?
Yeah, it literally did start as just a joke. Basically, we started working on it in May of 2020, which was a couple of months after we all went into lockdown. So we were working, at All Turtles. We had offices in San Francisco, Tokyo, and Paris. We had a bunch of different projects. And then in March of 2020, we all, we shut down all the offices, went fully distributed. And for the first couple of months, it was terrifying because, everyone's scared. You don't know if everyone's going to die. But a couple of months into it, by May, the sheer terror had sort of subsided, and it was replaced with just tedium, right? Everyone was just at home on video all the time, and all of the meetings were so boring and ineffective, and everything was just slow and sad and dingy. And so, yeah, we just started, playing around with video to just literally just make people laugh a little bit in meetings, thinking that, we would do this for a few days and then, that would be that. So initially we weren't really trying to solve any problems. It was literally a practical joke. But then as we started working on it and showing it, the reactions were just really good with people. And then I had this moment in May when I think I kind of started thinking about this as maybe a real product that's worth building. Is I had to teach a class. I occasionally will teach classes about various entrepreneurial stuff, and so I had to teach this class for some startup thing, and I had done that topic many times before, but in person, and they wanted me to teach it. I had to do it on video because of COVID, and I was like, oh man, this is gonna suck. I've got slides, and being on video is just gonna be boring, and I didn't want to do it. I wanted to cancel it because I didn't want to inflict 45 minutes of me droning on about state machines and metrics. There's a little box and on a Zoom call. So I was going to cancel it, but then I thought, well, wait, what if I use this thing that we've been playing around with and redo my presentation, not to be not to think of it as like a substitute for what I would do in person, not to be like, well, I can't do it in person, but let me get as close as possible to the experience. But instead just be like, well, what if I just remake it from the ground up to be really good on video? What could I do? So I did that, and I gave the talk, and I was, flying around and pointing things with my head and fading out and just doing all of the things. And it was great. It was like very engaging. And I realized that like, man, like my class online is better than the experience of it in person. Like the people who sat through it were like lucky that they saw it online and not in person. They had a better experience. And that's what made me think like, well, actually, maybe video isn't just like a short-term Band-Aid until we can be back together. Maybe it's like its own thing that can actually be pretty amazing long past the pandemic. And that's how we started thinking about it. And it just kind of snowballed from there.
Yeah, I had a question about that actually. That concept of not just trying to manage with video and model our way through, but actually see it as a tool to actually improve upon either in person or remote, and kind of see it as actually like it could be a better version of what you could have created in the first place, which I think is really interesting, because I think nowadays many companies, many founders are trying to figure out how to self-organize, right? How to get through the next couple of months, the next year, and whether they should go back to the office, whether they should have a hybrid working method, whether they should stay remote. So on that topic, I was also reading about how you noticed that there were some of these kind of superpowers, as you called them, which you can actually get from working online, like working with people that you wouldn't normally work with. So I think it affected all of us on a kind of a personal level, and we're all trying to kind of decide how we feel about it. So seeing as you've invested in mmhmm, and you're now growing it as a company, and you've obviously decided that it's something that's worth continuing with, I wanted to ask you about your opinion about remote working and your rationale for deciding how to self-organize your team and continue with remote work.
Well, I think first of all is like we're super careful and kind of try to be intentional about even just how we think about it. And so like I don't think it's remote. I think we don't say remote just because like remote to me means it immediately means at a disadvantage. Remote is like, well, you're sitting at home and like other people are gathering, at a central location and like having more fun, and like you're not. We think it's like we were remote in the beginning when we had to, when we were like all of a sudden forced to like disperse. Yeah, that was remote. But once we sort of decided to design and architect the company to be distributed, we became distributed. And distributed like in the same sense of like the internet is distributed. Like the internet is a distributed system designed to be distributed intentionally, because being distributed gives you so many advantages. Like the internet couldn't exist if it was, a centralized system. And it's not like the people who like invented the internet didn't know centralized systems. Like those have been around forever. They explicitly decided we're going to build a distributed, and here's how and here's why, because of the massive advantages in terms of resilience and diversity and everything else. And of course, like building a distributed system like the internet, like several things are harder than building a centralized system. There's a bunch of things that being distributed makes more difficult, but you solve those things. You have to problem solve them, but it doesn't take away from the massive advantages. And so we think about it the same way. Like we have chosen to build fully distributed companies, not because we have to, not because we don't know how to all be in the office, but because it's better, because it's fundamentally better. Being distributed is not a substitute for being in person. It is superior to being in person for construction of a company, for certain types of companies and certain tasks, obviously not for everything. So that's the main philosophy, is like, how do you lean into the superpowers, the massive advantages? And then once you kind of understand that, then you figure out how to solve the problems that also come along with being distributed. So to me, for our industry, I have 100% conviction about it. The fact that, just as a minor example, we're all knowledge workers. Everyone who works at our company is basically like to be doing creative work, entering information into a computer, making design, that kind of stuff. Like 0% of our employees waste any time commuting. It's a minor thing, but it's actually like just that is enough. Like before, I think the average commute time, I think worldwide is like 2 hours every day. So like nobody at our company is wasting 2 hours every day commuting or any time, which is shocking. Like it would be a dereliction of duty for me to like tell people, you know what, like, okay, everyone, now you have to waste 2 hours every single day sitting in traffic. Like, yeah, you didn't have to do it before, but now you do. And, you can't actually get any work done because it's not very productive and it's not time that you're spending with your family or your friends. And it's like pretty unhealthy. Oh, and it's terrible for the environment. But, CEOs decided 2 hours every day wasted sitting in traffic. Go. Like just not doing that is kind of an amazing superpower. And that's like the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more that, I can 100% of our job listings say global. So we hire people literally from everywhere in the world for every job, which is amazing. Everyone who works in our companies can afford to have a good lifestyle because they can live anywhere and they make the same amount of money. And so if you want to live in a city, you live in a city. If you want to have like a nice house and a nice neighborhood with good school districts, you do that. And you don't have to like wait for 20 years until you retire or 40 years. You can do it. You can do it right out of college if that's what you want. There's and people are much more productive. Because productivity and advancement is no longer tied to the personality types that do well, like being like, attractive and charismatic in person in an office setting. Like now, like advancement and productivity is based on like your ability to actually contribute. And so there's like plenty of people, for example, that are super creative, but don't want to talk or don't want to like think as fast as I do because like they want to like think through an idea a little bit more. So if they're in a meeting, like I'll just say the first thing that pops into my head. Sometimes it's right, maybe more than half the time. Sometimes it's wrong, but it's okay. It's like very fast. And, we bounce ideas off each other and we like come to some consensus. But there's a lot more people who are like, well, I'd rather like think through an idea for a few hours before I blurt it out in a meeting to the CEO. And in the past life, when we used to do all of the design sessions all like piled into one room, like those people didn't get very far. But now everyone does because it's all like asynchronous. So it's like, it is a breathtaking increase in overall productivity, quality of life and everything. And yeah, it comes with some problems and those problems need to be solved and we're figuring them out and we figured out some and not others yet, but the advantages are monumental. So I would never give it up.
Okay, thank you. That's really interesting to your point of view because there's so many people discussing this topic at the moment and it's affecting all of us, right? So so thanks. So I had a kind of curious, enigmatic question for the next one. I was reading that you, when building a business, you've spoken about paying attention to the numbers 3 and 10, which at first glance sounds really like off the wall. But I was wondering if you could explain that more for any founders who might want to use this methodology.
Yeah, so this is not my rule. This is Hiroshi Mikitani. Mikitani-san is the founder and CEO of Rakuten, which is it started in Japan. It was one of the big Japanese kind of internet companies. Now it's worldwide. They do things in every country. Mikitani-san or Mickey, as he goes, he's been just a great mentor. He's an investor in a bunch of our stuff. He's been a good friend and a mentor to me. I've written several books, a few of which are available in English, and I definitely recommend people to read them, or in Japanese if you can read Japanese. He was one of the very, very rare people who was the CEO of a company. He was like the first person there, so he was there when it was just him, and he's still the CEO. And I think now it's like 100,000 people. So like going from like 1 to 100,000 is like almost nobody can do that. Like Jeff Bezos maybe or him, and like there's like very very tiny handful of people who are good CEOs at all levels, and he talks about this rule of 3 and 10, which is basically that every time that your company triples something important, everything breaks. And it's 3 and 10 because it's, it could be 3 and 9, but then you have to like keep multiplying by 3, which gets hard for people. So you just basically, the shortcut is 3 and 10. So the idea is like, if you're like one person and you're just running your own thing and you've got things figured out, and then you like bring on a second person to like assist you and everything still kind of works. And then you bring on a third person and everything breaks because like you just went to 3. So now you have to like redo everything, and you're pretty good until you hit like roughly 10 people. And then like at roughly 10 people, everything breaks again. and then you figure it out, and then you're like pretty good until you get to roughly 30, and then everything breaks again, and then 100, and then 300, and then 1,000, and so on. So it's basically like roughly every tripling of every time an important thing triples, assume that everything's going to break and try to anticipate it. And the most obvious thing is just headcount. But it's really true of everything. It's like every time your revenue triples, or every time like your number of offices triple, or all of it, whatever it is, like a tripling, like assume is just going to break everything. And by everything, I really mean everything. I mean like how you communicate, how you pay people, what your strategy is, what kind of tools you use, how you do your expenses. Like everything just breaks roughly at every triple. And a lot of startups when they're growing quickly, they get into trouble because they miss several triplings. Like maybe they like get some stuff figured out by the time they're like 10 people, but then before they know it, they're 100 people, and they've just like blown through, two of these tripling events, and they're still using like processes and tools that they set up back when they were 10 people, and it's completely broken and unsatisfactory. And so you just have to like be aware of that and plan for it. And one of the most important things that breaks is leadership style. So, just for a founder and for a CEO, what's been working for you in terms of how to get people on the same page and productive and organized at 10 people is unlikely to keep working at 50, and almost certainly not going to keep working at 100 and then at 300 and so on. So it's a way to like remind yourself that like, as you grow, everything's going to change.
Okay. So yeah, to stay nimble, keep aware of everything, even your own leadership style.
Yeah, and not try to be like there's no, you can never conserve something. You can never prevent change. Like you shouldn't try. So, if you're thinking about like, oh man, like thinking about our culture, and like now we're at a few hundred people, but like, how do I make sure the culture doesn't change? I want to like keep the culture the same that it was when it was 10 people. And the answer is you can't keep the culture. You can't preserve anything. If you try to preserve it, it becomes brittle and it'll shatter, it'll break. So you can't preserve it. You just have to let go of it. Like being a startup entrepreneur is a fundamentally not conservative thing. You cannot be attached to the way something was. You must always be thinking about the way something should be. And so you can't prevent something from changing. So if you really like something, it's going to change. You can't prevent it. You shouldn't attempt to hold back the change. Instead, what you can do as the founder and CEO is to change intentionally. So you can't prevent your culture from changing when you go from 10 people to 30 to 100, but you can say, how do I want it to change? How do I want it to evolve? You could drive the change. That's doable, but like you can't react in a reactionary way and try to prevent it. So it's this idea of not more than just nimble. It's about embracing and loving change and not trying to hold it back, but trying to steer and direct it.
That's interesting, because I think one of the questions that startup founders or the founders of scale-ups, fast-growing scale-ups, often get asked is, how have you maintained your company culture? I've never heard it spoken about in that way. So that's, really interesting and unique. So I had one more question, which is based on your experience, both as managing director of General Catalyst and also your experience of growing and the video meeting world, and of course your talk which you did for the EU Startup Summit on how to make sure that your virtual pitch doesn't suck. So could you give our listeners, do you have any top tips for pitching virtually? Maybe you have 3 tips or 1 or 2. It doesn't really matter how many, but any top tips?
Well, I'll tell you the main thing, which really isn't just about pitching virtually. It's just about pitching in general. How you accomplish this will change. Maybe virtually you have more freedom to do it, but it doesn't change the fundamental thing. The fundamental thing that people need to realize is what your job is. When you're pitching, what is your job? And I look at it like this. Like when I was at General Catalyst, when I was investing there, I counted how many startups I interacted with every year. And I realized that I interact with about 3,000 startups a year. So I see 3,000 pitches. Of those 3,000, I took meetings with about 500, and I invested in 3. So that, and that was a very typical ratio for like relatively early stage tech. That wasn't like I wasn't being particularly productive. In fact, I was less productive than a lot of people in the industry. And now, like, I'm not a full-time investor. I still see at least 1,000 startups every year, probably more, probably like 1,500. So if you're talking to someone, if you're pitching, you have to understand that you have to be the most impressive thing that the investor has seen in a year, or else you're not going to get an investment. Like, that's your bar. You have to be the most impressive thing that they've seen in a year. Not the most impressive thing before lunch today, not the most impressive thing this week, not the most impressive thing in the past month. Unless you're like the most important thing, the most impressive thing that they've seen in the past year, you're basically not going to make it. So you have to ask yourself, like, how are you going to be, like, what is so impressive about this? How are you going to be the most impressive thing that they've seen all year? And to whom? And there's multiple ways of being really impressive. So for example, like if you're at a growth stage, a really good way to be really impressive is if you have amazing traction. You can like show investors some numbers, some traction for real, and they'll be like, oh my God, this is like the most impressive traction I've seen all year. Great, you're done. You're going to get investment. But you can't fake that. Like if you're just starting out, of course you can't do that because you don't have any numbers. So, in the beginning, like of mmhmm or of Evernote, we didn't have that. So we can't be the most impressive traction you've ever seen. So you have to be the most impressive in some other way. Maybe you can be the most impressive because it's like the most impressive team. Maybe you're like a rock star, super famous founder, and you've got this amazing team, and you could be like, oh my God, this is the most impressive team I've seen all year. Okay. But most people don't have that. I certainly never had that. So what was left for me and for most people, at least at an early stage, is I have to be the most entertaining pitch that they've seen all year. And you just have to internalize that. Like if you're pitching Mr. Startup Founder or Miss Startup Founder, you got to be the most impressive thing that the investor has seen all year. That's just how the numbers work. And, potentially one of the few ways to do that is just to like be entertaining, like be aware that this is theater, you are the entertainment for this time. And if you bore them, it's just like you're done. You can't bore investors. You have to be entertaining, which, I do by telling jokes and doing a lot of jazz hands. Obviously, different people have different styles. You got to find like the right balance. But like the main philosophy is it is your job when you're like standing in front on whether it's on video or in person, an investor, and you are one of 3,000 early stage startups that they've just seen in the past 12 months. You really got to stand out among the last 1,000, at least among the past year. And a very good way to do that is to just be memorable, be entertaining. And video gives you all sorts of superpowers for doing that, which is much harder to do in person. You can think about, making interactive slides of your face and like the things you're showing about, and you can tell a story in many more amazing ways on video, especially interactive video, than you can in person. That's why like there's so much more. It's like the difference between like a movie and theater. Like you can do a lot in theater, but you can do a lot in a movie. So, think about doing that. And that's one of the reasons why I think we started and why it's getting so much traction among people who are pitching is because like, yeah, obviously you can tell a really compelling story with it if you think about how to use the tools. And you can do it very scalably because, if you do it as a video, you can get it. It costs you nothing to have every single investor on the planet see it if that's what you want. Again, movie versus theater. You don't have to perform from scratch every single time, uniquely. And, so it's both more entertaining. So it's easier to be the most impressive thing all year. And you have, much more top of the funnel you can talk to. You can be exposed to several hundred investors versus a dozen, which is what it would be like before. And then any who are interested, you then take it to the next level and you have a, more of a real synchronous discussion. And, if you've only talked to 10 people, your chances of being the most impressive thing that any of those 10 have seen all year is lower than if you've talked to, or not talked to, but been exposed to 1,000 people. Then you have a much higher chance.
And I think, as you said, like once you make an impression, once you're memorable, it also creates a connection, right? You're going to stick in their mind. Then, yeah, exactly.
This is the main thing, right? It's like you gotta, I get it because I've been raising money for the past 27 years nonstop for all sorts of things. I hate it, but like you have to get out of your own head. Like if you're a founder and you've been thinking about this company, it's been by far the most important thing to you for the past year, 2 years, 3 years. You know everything about it. It's not boring to you. it's so difficult, like when you're pitching, to get out of that mode and to be like, see yourself through the eyes of the investors and be like, for them, they haven't been working on it for the past 3 years and they haven't been invested in it. And it hasn't been the most important thing. And they don't know everything about it. So is like, if you just see yourself through their eyes and just ask like, is this a good, entertaining, and impressive performance? So like, what about it is like so exceptional? And if your answer is like, well, nothing about it is exceptional, it's only exceptional to me because I've spent the past 3 years on it, then that's a weak place to be when you're pitching. You have to be exceptional to them.
Very interesting. Good point. And yeah, I hope there's some founders who are listening who might be preparing for a pitch at the moment. We've caught them in time and they can take that on board. So yeah, that was my last question. So all that's left to say is thank you for joining us and giving your insights on creating your previous companies and in pitching and your thoughts on remote work. And yeah, we look forward to seeing what happens in the future and how mmhmm grows and any other project that you start in the future.
Thank you. Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks for having me on.